The wind swept across the Montana plains like a restless ghost, lifting dust and snow in the same breath. Fences groaned, and the boards of the Quinn ranch creaked under the cold. Silas Quinn stood beside his horse, one hand on the saddle horn, the other absently brushing the frost from his gloves. He was a man carved from the land he worked, broad-shouldered, sun-cut lines on his face, eyes always watching the horizon as though it still owed him an answer. For years, silence had been his companion. Silence in the mornings when the cattle were fed. Silence at night when whiskey wasn't strong enough to quiet memory. The ranch was large, prosperous, and empty. It was all his doing and his burden. He'd just tightened the cinch when a small, trembling voice drifted over the wind. "Mr. Please, just be our daddy for today." Silas froze. The horse snorted, sensing the sudden stillness. He turned toward the sound. At the edge of the yard, near the split-rail fence, stood two little girls. They couldn't have been more than 7 or 8. Twins by the look of them. Their cheeks were pink from cold, their hands clutching the fence post, as though it were the last solid thing in the world. One had a neat braid tied with string. The other's hair blew wild around her face. Both wore threadbare shawls cut from the same blanket. "Where's your ma?" Silas asked quietly. The neater twin lifted her chin, brave but quivering. "In the wagon, sir. She's real sick. The doctor ain't in town. The lady at the boarding house said we couldn't stay no more." The other girl's eyes filled. "We thought maybe if we had a daddy, just for today, people might help." The wind gusted again, rattling the empty corral. Silas's chest ached in that deep old way that no medicine could touch. Long ago, another voice had asked him for a promise he hadn't kept. He'd spent the years since trying not to hear it. He knelt beside the fence. "What's your names?" "Juniper," said the neat one. "And this is June Berry. Ma says she named us for green things that live even when it's cold." Silas managed a small smile. "Those are good names. Strong ones." He looked out toward the hills. Snow was building there, heavy and fast. "Show me your wagon." The girls led him around the corral, boots crunching in the frozen dirt. A patched wagon sat near the windbreak, its canvas sagging. Inside lay a woman, thin, pale, her breath shallow as a whisper. Her hair was damp with fever. Beside her, a folded shawl and a cup of cold tea. Silas touched her forehead lightly. "Hot as a branding iron." "Your ma's burning up," he said. "She needs warmth and medicine." From the doorway of the barn, his foreman, Emil, watched silently. Behind him, Kiona, the Lakota healer who traded herbs for hay, approached with calm certainty. "She's fighting the lung fever," Kiona said softly. "She needs steam, willow bark, and someone to keep her daughters from fearing too much." Silas nodded once. "I'll get the men to bring in stones and heat the stove. We'll keep her here till she's steady." Juniper tugged his coat sleeve. "Does that mean you'll be our daddy for today?" He looked down at her. 2 eyes, bright with impossible hope. "For today," he said, voice low but sure. "And if the storm keeps tomorrow from finding us, we'll make today last longer." As dusk fell, snow began to drift sideways across the yard. The hired men hauled wood, and Kiona brewed her medicines. The twins whispered stories to their mother, brave and small voices filling the quiet. Outside, Silas stood guard by the fence. Lantern light flickered on his face as he scanned the white horizon. He had kept his word, but the night had other plans. Beyond the rail spur, 3 lanterns moved in a slow, deliberate line, too steady for travelers, too many for friends. Silas's hand found the rifle by the door. Inside the ranch house, the twins clung to each other, unaware that danger was riding through the snow toward the only man who had promised to be their daddy for just one day. And as the wind roared against the walls, Silas Quinn whispered to himself, A promise is a promise, even if the day's not done. The storm came fast and without mercy. By midnight, the wind had turned the plains into a white sea, the sky and earth blending until even the fences disappeared. Snow hissed against the windows of the Quinn ranch house, burying tracks and swallowing sound. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sage and steam. Kiona's voice murmured softly in Lakota, the rhythm of her words a heartbeat against the storm. Nora May lay pale beneath the quilts, her fever easing but not yet broken. Juniper and Juneberry dozed at her side, their small hands still clutching their mother's. Silas watched from the doorway, hat in his hands, rifle leaning against the wall beside him. He should have been resting, but his eyes kept drifting to the window, toward those lanterns that had moved beyond the fence earlier. Outlaws didn't usually ride in weather like this unless they had a reason. And rich men with full pantries were reason enough. A sharp knock split the quiet. The twins stirred. Silas moved silently, motion honed by years of cattle drives and old wars he didn't speak of. He opened the door a crack. The wind bit his face. Outside, Sheriff O'Shea stood with his coat crusted white. "Evening, Quinn," the sheriff said, stepping in. "Storm's tearing the line road to pieces. We've got reports of a gang near the rail spur. Same bunch that hit the stage last week." Silas nodded. "They're close. Saw lanterns." O'Shea's eyes flicked toward the sick room. "Heard tell you took in a woman and her girls. They had nowhere else." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "You always did have a soft spot for strays." Silas didn't answer. O'Shea sighed. "I'll leave a warning with the town telegraph if the line holds. You keep your rifle close. Those boys won't care who's sick inside." When the sheriff left, the wind slammed the door, like an omen. Silas stood for a long moment, his palm pressed against the wood before he turned back to the fire. Kiona met his eyes. "Trouble rides the same path as mercy," she said quietly. "So I've learned." He checked the rifle, loaded 6 shells, and set it within reach. He wasn't a violent man, but he understood what survival asked of a body. By dawn, the storm had quieted to a whisper. The world outside was white and still, every fence post capped in snow, the horizon a blur of pale light. Silas stepped out to check the barns. The air was sharp enough to cut breath in two. His boots sank deep, crunching in rhythm with his heartbeat. Halfway to the stable, he stopped. 3 horses were tethered to the cottonwoods, strangers' mounts, half frozen, their reins hanging slack. Boot prints led toward the house. Silas tightened his grip on the rifle. The tracks weren't from the sheriff. They were fresh, too fresh. Inside, Juniper woke first. She blinked in the dim light and reached for her sister. "June, where's Mr. Quinn?" "Outside, I think," Juneberry whispered. "Maybe he's feeding the horses." But then came the sound of a board creaking, slow, deliberate. Inside the house, Kiona's head snapped up. She moved silently, toward the corner, fingers tightening around the handle of a kitchen knife. The door to the sick room opened a few inches, and a man's shadow fell across the floor. Tall, thin, wrapped in a long coat. Another followed, then another. They smelled of whiskey and dust, and their eyes gleamed with hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Well, look here," one drawled. "Ain't we lucky? A rich man's ranch, a sick lady, and 2 little girls. Maybe the boss was right. Quinn's sitting on gold." Juneberry whimpered, small and quick. The sound snapped something in Silas. He moved fast. The rifle cracked, like thunder. One outlaw went down before he hit the floor. The others dove for cover, firing blind. Snow blew in through the door as glass shattered. Kiona pulled the twins beneath the bed, her body shielding them. Silas reloaded, calm as winter itself. His voice cut through the chaos. "You picked the wrong fence to climb." A second man tried the back window. Silas's bullet met him before his boots hit the sill. The last outlaw, wild-eyed, bleeding, grabbed a lantern and hurled it toward the stove. Flame caught the oil, bright and sudden. The room filled with light and smoke. Silas lunged forward, kicking the lantern aside. Fire licked his sleeve before he smothered it with his coat. When the smoke cleared, the outlaws lay still. Only the storm moved beyond the window now, gentle, again, as if nothing had happened. Silas stood over them, chest heaving, eyes hard. Kiona rose from where she had hidden the girls. "The spirits tested you," she said softly, "and you did not break." The twins crept toward him, clinging to his coat. Juniper whispered, "Mr. Quinn, are we safe now?" He crouched to meet their eyes. "For now, little ones, but safety's a thing we keep making every day, sometimes with fences, sometimes with courage." Outside, the sun pushed weakly through the clouds, painting the snow in gold. The storm had passed, but something had changed inside Silas Quinn. He looked at those girls, two bits of hope in a hard land, and knew his promise could no longer end with daylight. And though none of them said it aloud, they all understood. One day had just become forever. The weeks after the storm melted slow like sugar in coffee. The snow shrank back into the gullies, leaving behind dark, rich soil and the promise of spring. The river near the Stone Creek Ranch cracked its frozen skin, murmuring again beneath the cottonwoods. Nora Mae Carver found her strength returning in pieces, one breath, one sunrise, one careful step at a time. She helped in the kitchen now, though Kiona scolded her for working too soon. The twins followed her everywhere, barefoot when the sun grew kind enough, their laughter trailing behind like birdsong. And Silas Quinn, well, something inside him had begun to thaw too. He still rose before dawn, same as always. He still rode the fence lines, checked the stock, mended what winter had broken. But his silence had softened. The ranch no longer felt like a man's exile. It felt lived in again. Sometimes he'd come in from the yard to find Juneberry sitting on the porch rail, waiting for him, a mug of coffee cradled carefully in both hands. Sometimes Juniper would follow him out to the barn, asking endless questions about every horse, every nail, every brand. He never turned her away. Nora Mae noticed it all, the way he looked at the girls, the way they trusted him without fear. And it stirred something in her she'd buried long ago. The hope that maybe safety wasn't just a dream borrowed from braver people. One afternoon, she found Silas in the workshop, shaping a small wooden horse with his knife. The shavings lay curled like pale ribbons around his boots. "You've got a careful hand," she said from the doorway. He looked up, smiled faintly. "Had to learn. Horses don't much like rough men. Nor do children," she said softly. Silas set the carving down, his eyes steady on hers. "You thinking of leaving when the thaw comes?" She hesitated. The truth hung heavy between them. "I don't know. The world's been cruel to a woman without a name that carries weight. But I can't stay forever on a man's charity." He wiped the sawdust from his palms. "This isn't charity, Miss Carver. You and your girls saved this place as much as I saved you." She frowned. "How do you figure that? Before you came, this house was just wood and nails. Now it's got laughter, the kind I thought was gone for good." Nora Mae looked away, blinking hard. Outside, the wind carried the sound of the twins calling to the horses, pure and bright. Later that evening, the sheriff arrived at last, coat dusty from the thaw. He tipped his hat to Nora Mae and gave Silas a long look. "Those bandits won't trouble you again," he said. "Found the rest of their camp 10 miles south. You did the territory a favor." Silas nodded but said nothing. O'Shea studied the girls playing in the yard, their dresses bright against the brown earth. "They call you Daddy now?" Silas's mouth twitched. "For a day, that's how it started. Looks like that day hasn't ended." O'Shea said, half grinning. When the sheriff rode off, dusk was already stretching long over the fields. Nora May stood on the porch, her shawl drawn tight around her shoulders. "I'll have to think about the road ahead," she murmured. Silas joined her, hands in his coat pockets. "You could think from here. There's room enough. The girls can have the south loft. You could take the spare room. Call it working the books or keeping order if you like." She studied him, quiet. "And what would you call it?" "Home," he said simply. The word fell between them like a seed. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. They just stood there, watching the twins chase each other through the golden light, their laughter echoing off the barn. A week later, Nora May began helping with the ranch's accounts. She took to it easily, her handwriting fine and sure. Silas pretended not to notice the way her hair caught the afternoon sun when she leaned over the ledger, and she pretended not to notice how often he found excuses to check the figures beside her. Kiona watched it all with a knowing smile. "Spring brings new things," she told them both one day. "Flowers, calves, sometimes families." Silas said nothing, but he didn't need to. One night, when thunder rolled in the distance and the smell of rain filled the air, the twins crept into the parlor where Silas sat by the fire. "Mr. Quinn," Juniper whispered, rubbing her eyes, "if we stay here forever, will you still be our daddy then?" Silas looked at her, his throat tightening. He lifted both girls into his lap and held them close. "If you stay," he said quietly, "then I reckon I'll be your daddy every day the sun comes up." Outside, the first rain of spring began to fall, washing away the last of the snow. Inside, under the steady glow of lamplight, the rich rancher who had once lived alone finally began to believe that some winters end, not with silence, but with laughter. Summer came to Stone Creek Valley like a prayer answered late, but still worth saying. The grass rose green and high, the creek ran clear, and wildflowers bloomed where the snow had once buried the world. The ranch, once cold and silent, now sang with life. Laughter from the porch, the rhythm of hooves in the fields, and music from Nora May's soft voice humming at dusk. Silas Quinn had never imagined this kind of peace. Every morning before the sun climbed over the ridgeline, he would rise to the sound of giggles instead of silence. The twins had made the ranch their kingdom. Juniper forever asking questions about the land, Juneberry chasing chickens in her patched blue dress. They'd even given names to every horse, whether the animals liked it or not. Nora May, stronger now, worked beside Kiona in the gardens and kept the ledgers tidy at night. Her cheeks carried color again, her laughter easy. Still, there were moments when Silas would find her standing alone by the fence, her gaze stretched far toward the east, toward the world she had once meant to return to. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the plains, he found her there. "Thinking of leaving?" he asked quietly. She smiled without looking at him. "Thinking of what it means to stay." Silas leaned against the post beside her. "This land doesn't ask for much. Just patience, and maybe a bit of faith." "Faith," she repeated soft. "That's the hardest part." They stood in silence, the twilight wrapping around them. From the yard came the sound of the girls, singing an old lullaby their mother had taught them. The notes drifted across the fields like something fragile but unbreakable. Nora May turned then, her eyes searching his. "You've been good to us, Silas, better than anyone had reason to." "Be." He shook his head. "You gave this place back its heartbeat. That's worth more than I can say." Her lips curved faintly. "And yet, a woman still needs to know where she belongs." Silas hesitated. "You belong right here, with your girls, with me if you'll have it that way." The words hung between them, simple and true. The air itself seemed to still, waiting for her answer. But before she could speak, the sound of hoofbeats broke the quiet. Hard, fast, urgent. Silas turned sharply. A rider was coming down the road, dust rising behind him. When he reached the gate, the man's face was one Silas recognized. Deputy Thorne from town. "Quinn," the deputy called, reining in his horse. "We've got trouble." "One of the outlaws that escaped that night? He's been seen near your boundary line. Says he's coming back for what's his." Silas's jaw hardened. "He's got nothing here," Thorne nodded. "Just figured you'd want to." "No." And with that, he turned and galloped off into the darkening plain. Nora May's hand found Silas's arm. "You think he'll come here?" "Maybe," Silas said. "But if he does, he won't find what he's looking for." That night, the house stayed lit later than usual. The twins were told it was just a precaution, though the adults knew better. Silas sat by the front door, rifle resting across his knees, listening to the sounds of the night, the owls, the cattle lowing, the faint wind in the cottonwoods. Nora May appeared quietly, a lantern in her hand. "You can't stay up all night," she said. He smiled faintly. "I've done it before." She hesitated, then set the lantern down and sat beside him. For a long while, neither spoke. Finally, she said, "You can't protect the world, Silas." "No," he admitted, "but I can protect my piece of it." The way he said it, steady, certain, left no room for doubt. Nora May looked at him, her heart twisting with something both fierce and tender. She placed her hand over his. "Then let this be your home, and let us be part of it." Silas met her gaze, the firelight catching the lines time had carved into his face. "You already are," he said quietly. Before dawn, the last of the danger passed without a shot fired. The outlaw was caught by the sheriff miles south, never reaching the ranch. By morning, peace returned again, fragile but real, and when the first light touched the valley, Silas walked outside to see Juniper and Juneberry sitting on the fence, braiding wildflowers into their hair. "Mr. Quinn," Juniper called, grinning wide. "Can we call this forever now?" He looked at them, two little girls who had wandered into his life on a cold, hopeless day, and then at Nora May standing in the doorway, watching him with that quiet strength he had come to love. Silas smiled, the kind that came from deep inside. "Yeah," he said, voice warm as morning sun. "Forever sounds just about right." And as the wind stirred through the fields, carrying the laughter of children and the hum of a woman's song, the rich rancher who had once lived alone finally understood that family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you chose to keep, no matter how hard the winter had been.